Okay, now we're going to put absolutely everything together and draw a still life, which means a combination of objects on a table using only lines. So please don't shade the drawing, don't bother with the glass, the rendering, that's something we're going to deal with later. Before starting the still life, we need to make one really important decision, which is going to determine the success of our drawing, the success of our composition. We need to figure out what is the best orientation for the subject matter. Let's say I'm doing a drawing of a tree. The tree is really tall. So if I draw a tree, the best orientation for that tree, it's a horrible looking tree, the best orientation for this tree is a vertical orientation, is a portrait format. Because if I use a horizontal format to draw the tree, I'm going to have a lot of what's called negative space. So in art, we have this term, positive and negative space. Positive space is the object. Negative space is the air around the object, empty space. You always want to have a good balance between positive and negative space. So in this case, a portrait orientation gives you a better balance of positive and negative space than a horizontal orientation. Let's say I need to draw a banana. Which orientation would be better for this banana? Well, obviously, a horizontal orientation. Right? A vertical orientation would be ineffective. Right? We'd have a lot of empty, this looks more like a whale now, a lot more empty space than we need. All right? So that's always the first decision. Am I going to hold the board this way or this way? Which is the most effective orientation? How do you decide? Well, we need to figure out if our objects are wider than they are tall or taller than they are wide. We're going to use our proportion measuring tool to do that. So the tip of my pencil goes to the brandy bottle. And then I'm going to move back a little bit so I can see everything. And then my thumbnail goes to the handle on the copper cup. And now I'm going to compare the width of all my objects together against the height of all my objects together. In this case, obviously the width is much longer than the height. Sometimes it's hard to tell, in which case you're going to have to use this tool. So the arrangement of objects are a little bit wider than they are high or a little bit higher than they are wide. Right? Use your proportion measuring tool to measure all the objects and get the general orientation. Okay, this is a giant waste of paper, but I'm going to start a fresh page. Actually, before we do, one additional consideration. Okay, so we also want to make sure that we're drawing our objects large enough so that there's a good balance of positive and negative space. So imagine that this is my piece of paper. If I draw the objects really small like this, that would be a really poor use of positive and negative space. Right? Too much negative space, very little positive space. Right? Conversely, if I start the bottle really big like this, well, it's going to start running off the paper. The cube is going to start running off the paper. This is a poor use of positive space, positive negative space, because there's too much positive space. Now, it's not always a mistake to cut things off, but for this assignment, I want you to make sure that the objects comfortably fit on the paper. How do we do this? Okay, now let's go to a clean sheet, and I will show you how. Here's how this works. I'm going to choose an object either on the left or the right. It needs to be something that is convenient. How do you decide? It's all sort of based on the size. If the thing you're going to use to measure is too small, then you're going to be measuring 20 increments, 40 increments. If it's too big, then you're going to start dealing with fractions. So in this case, the width of the brandy bottle is about the right size for this task. So I'm going to take a measurement of it at its widest part. And then I'm going to count out how many times that width fits into my entire still life, my entire arrangement of objects. Let's see. Once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, 5, and maybe about 5 1/4 times. Okay, how do we use this information? Well, let's decide that our still life is going to start right about here, like this. Let's estimate the width of the brandy bottle. We're going to make it like this. And now we're going to count out Here's 1, here's 2. So now that I am not holding the camera, this becomes a lot easier. So here's 2, here's 3, here's 4, 5, 5 1/4 is going to be over here. So based on the width of this bottle, we know that our still life is going to end here. Right? That's a really useful tool because let's say I counted out 5 and it ended up here. Well, I've got this huge amount of empty space over here. Then I'm going to increase the size of the bottle. Or I made it so big that 5 1/4 runs off the paper. That tells me immediately that I'm drawing too large. So this initial estimate is absolutely key to getting the composition, the layout of your drawing right. This is really, really important stuff. Okay. Now I know what the width of my bottle needs to be. Where do I start it up and down here? Well, I noticed that it's not the lowest object, right? It's not the furthest, the bottom of the bottle is not the furthest thing down on the table. The copper cup is, right? So I'm going to decide that my copper cup is going to start here, right about here, like this, right? And how do I make sure that I have enough space up here? Well, it's really easy. I take a measurement of the bottle, and then starting from the copper cup, I measure 1, 2, 3. 3 of these bottles should fit from here all the way to the apple. Let's see if I've left enough space. 1, 2, 3. Okay, so now I know that my still life is going to end somewhere here. We know it's not going to be too big, it's not going to be too small, it's going to be just the right size. Okay, so if my copper cup starts here, now I'm going to use my horizontal alignment tool, line up my pencil with the bottom of the bottle, and check across. It's a little tiny bit higher than my copper cup. Just a little tiny bit. All right, so now I know my bottle is going to start right about here. What's the next step? Well, we've got the width of the bottle. Now we need to figure out how tall it is. The process now is exactly the same. We're going to take the width and see how many times it fits in the height. Once, twice, 2, and 3/4 times. Here's 1, here's 2, here's 3, here's 3/4. There's a dimension of my bottle. It's a symmetrical object. Draw a plumb line. And start gathering information. Right? How thick is the neck? For example, 1, 2, about 1/3, right? So let's find 1/3 of the width and center it along our plumb line. How long is the neck? Right? How long is it straight until it starts curving outward? It looks like it's about 3/4 the width, right about there. Okay, we've got some angles. Let's get them. Keep things really sketchy. This ellipse is really small. We're just going to eyeball it. This one needs to be a little bit curvier than this one, right? It's further down. I'm not sure I got this angle right. It's a little bit steeper, Okay, now let's keep moving forward. Let's deal with the cube. Now, a number of different ways I can start. I can first start by measuring the distance from the bottle to this side, but we usually start cubes from the front corner, right? That's usually the way we're going to start cubes. So let's figure out where that front corner actually is. How do we do that? Well, let's figure out what the distance is between this bottle and the front edge of the cube. We're going to take a measurement of the width of the bottle and then count out 1, 2. It's almost exactly 2 widths from here to the front edge of our cube. Here it is. Here's the front edge. Now we need to figure out where it starts on the bottom, here. How do we do that? Use your horizontal alignment tool, line it up with the bottom of the cube up there, and we notice it runs right about here. Right about here. Let's see, yeah, right about here. Okay, how tall is that cube? Well, now that we have a number of objects, it becomes easier and easier to measure because we can use a number of different measuring techniques to do it. For instance, I can take a measurement of the bottle and see how many times it fits into the height. Let's do that. A little less than 2. I can definitely do that. I can also check the horizontal alignment between the front corner and the bottle. It runs to right about here, like this. And usually what I'll do in these situations is that I'll use more than one measurement to make sure to cross-check my information. So I'll use both the horizontal alignment and I'll check the distance here. If both agree with each other, I'm pretty certain that I've gotten it right. Okay, next step in the process, the same as always. Get your corners, angle, angle. Get the bottom two angles. Remember to keep the bottom two angles a little steeper than the top angles, right? Make sure there's a difference. Now, in this case, this side of the cube is partially obscured by the copper cup. Draw through it. So this is an important principle. Draw through objects at the beginning when you're sketching them. Pretend like everything's transparent. It's going to help you get your shapes correct. Get your shapes right. Okay. Now let's get the widths of the sides. Again, there's now more than one way of doing this. In this case, I'm going to measure from here and compare that to the height. About 3/4. Right about there. Like this. Let's get the other side. This side we're going to use something else. Instead of taking this measurement, we're going to see the distance between the bottle and the left side of the cube. Let's do that. We're going to measure from here to the cube and then compare that to the width. It looks like it's about half. Right, so the distance from here to here is about half the distance of the width of the bottle. And again, we can cross-check our information to make sure that we've gotten it right. Boom, boom, here and here. Okay, more or less right. All right, what else? Well, we've got our back two angles to deal with. Backs down. Hopefully you guys remember that at this point. Backs down, back two angles. These two angles need to be flatter than the front two angles, right? So whatever this angle is, the back angle has to be flatter, right? Whatever this angle is, this angle has to be flatter. Over time, you're going to start developing a sensitivity to angle. You're going to start actually seeing it. So when you see cubes with angles that are too steep in the back, you're going to be able to see it. It's going to bug you. It's going to feel kind of like itchy. Something's going to be wrong. But for right now, make sure you're measuring, make sure you're cross-checking your information. Draw the angle, bring it back up, bring it back down again. Do this a few times until you're absolutely certain your angles are correct. And then stay sketchy all the way until you're completely done with the drawing. Do not commit to any dark lines at all. Okay, let's deal with the apple. Let's start by figuring out where it starts on this side and where it ends on this side using our vertical alignment tool. So I'm going to line out my pencil with the right side of the apple. It lines up right about here, like this. The left side of the apple runs right about here, like this. And then I can cross-check my information to see if the apple is wide enough by taking a measurement of the apple and comparing it to the width of the bottle. Let's see if I got it right. Yeah, I'm close. I'm close. All right. Now let's figure out where the apple starts, how much further up it is. It looks like the base of the apple runs a little bit tiny bit lower than this corner. Right about here. Now we can check the proportion of the apple. It's 1 and 1. We've already drawn this apple. We've seen this apple before. Right? Now we can figure out where the apple is at its widest part, right about here. Right? How much narrower this part is. It looks like it's about 3/4, right? This and this is about 3/4. Get some angles. Don't commit to the lines. Just block in, right? Just sketch in your shape very, very simply. Okay, there's your apple. Now let's deal with the copper cup. Let's deal with the copper cup. Ignore the handle at the beginning and just figure out where it is. So we know it's going to start here already. Let's figure out where it starts over here. We can take a distance from here to the left side of the copper cup and compare it to something. Let's compare it to the width of the bottle. It turns out they're the same. Okay, our copper cup starts here. How tall is it? Let's take a measurement from the bottom to the top and compare it to the width of the bottle. It looks like it runs a little bit longer. Again, a number of different ways this can be measured. It could also be measured using a horizontal alignment. I can also take a measurement of the width and see how many times it fits into the height. Right? Lots of different ways to measure now. So for instance, to get the width of the cup, I can measure the apple and see how it compares. The width of the apple and the width of the copper cup, the same. Symmetrical object, plumb line. Right, let's deal with the dimensions of the ellipse here. We're going to take a measurement from the back to the front, and looks like the back to the front fits about twice into the width. Right? So now we need to estimate a rectangle whose width is twice the height. We already have a vertical division. Here's a horizontal division, and now we're going to sketch in our ellipse. One thing I forgot to do on this cup, however, I'm noticing, is that this part's a little bit narrower, right? Okay, so let's narrow it out a little bit. Let's figure out how much narrower this is than the width. Okay, it's like this. Okay. So we need a rectangle that looks like that. I don't know where my eraser went. Okay, well, we'll deal with that. All right, a little mess up here. I made the ellipse a little too wide. But look, I make mistakes, especially when lecturing. Right, lots to think about. The point is, I don't commit to anything. I do not commit to a darker line until I'm absolutely certain my object is drawn correctly. And I'm constantly checking. I'm constantly measuring. I'm constantly using all the different measuring techniques to make sure that things are okay. All right, let's deal with the handle. Where does it start? It starts right here. Where does it end? It ends right here. How wide is it? Let's take a measurement from here to the end of the handle and compare it to something, the width of our cup. It looks like it's about half. It comes out to here like this. How tall is it? Up here, it's a little bit higher than the back of the cup, like that. And now that I've got my information, I can sketch in the shape using my newly acquired, honed, perfected contour drawing ability. All right, now that the objects are entirely sketched in, now I'm going to go back. Well, I don't have to go back. I can just start with the cup or any one of the objects and finish them, refine them with lines. Okay, in this case, I'm going to go back to the bottle and start working on the details. Now that I've got the proportions worked out, I can focus exclusively on putting in a nice line. When doing this drawing, look, put in as much detail as you want. But really, all you need to focus on is the outside of the drawing. So don't worry about the detail. We'll get to the detail later. All right. Notice that whatever curve I have here, this one needs to gradually, little by little, become curvier. Right? The ellipse is opening up as it's going down. So be consistent. Curvy, curvier, curvier, curvier on the way down. Sometimes I'll put in one consistent line. Sometimes I'll let the line build up. Particularly for longer lines, it helps to build up the lines little by little. Right? So drawing a line is easier when it's made up of a bunch of little lines. However, when it comes to ellipses, sometimes it just helps to hunker down and draw the complete shape. In this case, this is just pure focus on the contour. I'm looking at the angles here. Not the angles, the curves, right? Okay. Sometimes for these lines, you can hold your pencil way back like this and let your finger rest on the paper. It's going to help you get straight lines. So I was showing you the thumb and forefinger grip. There's a number of different ways of using it, of holding it, right? So sometimes I'll actually rest my knuckle against the paper. That's better for shading. We'll talk about later. For straight lines, a little bit of a higher angle, right? For sharper lines is better. And by the way, don't be afraid to rotate your paper. Perfectly okay. You're allowed to do it. when you have your pencil further away, your grip further away from the tip, it gives you better control over large movements, so large circles, straighter lines, right? But worse control over little details. So for instance, when it comes to drawing the handle, sometimes you could just rest your entire hand on the piece of paper and use your fingers to put in the line. So you can see a number of different grips are appropriate depending on what you're doing. They also give you slightly different line qualities. So, when you hold your pencil really sideways, it gives you a little bit of a fuzzier line. Right? When you hold the writer's grip, it gives you a really fine, sharp line. I work back and forth. Sometimes I'll switch to the writer's grip, again, particularly when there's a lot of precision in a little area that's required. And, sometimes I'll rotate my paper and switch to this grip to draw a straight line. You'll find that artists use a really large variety of different grips. There's some artists are very strict, they use the same grip all the way through. Okay, here is our first still life, the first of several we will be doing. Normally I would erase the construction and measuring lines after I'm done with the drawing, but in this case I thought it would be useful for you to see them, so I left them in. Notice that all of these construction, these building lines, these measuring lines, are really light, which will make them easy to erase later. The fact is, once you get good at keeping your sketches light, you'll barely have to use your eraser at all, because this is not the end of the drawing. We're going to shade the drawing, we're going to add detail, and ideally all those initial construction lines are going to get lost, they're going to get buried underneath the finished drawing. You'll find that quite often a proficient artist will not need to use an eraser at all because of this. Now, for your classwork, I would like you to work from this image, which I will make available for download. Though the orientation of the paper has been decided for you, I'd like you to go through the process of measuring the entire still life, comparing the width to the height, go through the process that's demonstrated in the video. Now, keep in mind that we have quite a few options now when it comes to the measuring tools that you use. So in that respect, feel free to use whatever measuring methods you feel like using, so long as they arrive at the same conclusion. Once you're done, please upload your work, and I'll take a look at it and make sure that you're going through the process correctly and give you feedback.